This is the Influencer Entrepreneurs Podcast with Jenny Melrose, where I strategize with business owners on how to grow and scale their businesses to hit their income goals. This is episode 256 of the Influencer Entrepreneurs Podcast with Jenny Melrose. Today, we're going to be talking about the fastest way to build authority online with Amanda Abella. You're going to hear that Amanda is an OG, or as I like to call, dinosaur blogger as well. She did it when those dinosaurs still roamed the internet earth and not many things existed like Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest had just started. So she's got a really unique perspective, and she's going to make sure that she makes this relevant for bloggers. You are going to hear us talk a little bit about growing your email list and the importance of actually doing that. So before we dive into the episode, I want to make sure that if you haven't already grabbed my Growing Your Email List guide, that you get that. You're going to hear how important it is in order to build your authority, the things that you need to do, but then how to actually end up making revenue off of that comes from growing your list. So please, please, please make sure you grab that guide. Send me a DM on Instagram at Jenny_Melrose, and I will make sure to send it to you. All right, let's dive in. Hi, Amanda. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I was just telling you before we started, I love talking to other OGs in the blogging space. So this is going to be good. I'm excited.
Yes, it definitely will be. Before we jump into the fastest ways to build authority online, which is the topic that we're really going to dive hard into, will you introduce yourself and your business to my audience?
Yeah. So my name is Amanda Abella. I'm the founder and CEO of Make Money Your Honey. That's what I do now. I'm the owner of a marketing and sales training company for women coaches, consultants, and service providers who are looking to scale. So we help people basically triple their revenue while working half the time. And we do that by teaching a framework that covers system, influence, which we're going to be talking a lot about today, and sales. And previous to that, in my first business, I actually started as a blogger like you, and I spent 8 years as a personal finance blogger, freelance writer. I did brand work. I did it all, girl. I did it all.
Well, I love that because my audience is primarily bloggers, influencers, and small business owners that are trying to understand how to really use their influence in order to continue to scale and grow their business. So since you've done it and understand the way that we talk and we think, this I know is going to be a great conversation. So why do you think in 2022 it is important to build your authority online?
I think it's always been important. But unfortunately, one of the trends, I'm seeing two trends, right? And you tell me if you've seen this because we've been in the online space for a long time. I think part of what's gone on is like anybody could hang up a shingle and call themselves a business owner. And if you're like really slick with sales, then you can get anybody in. But there's a whole lot of disgruntled customers out here right now and clients because they've been burned in some way, shape, or form because there's not a whole lot of regulation in this online space, and that's definitely turned into a really big problem over the years. I mean, I don't remember seeing that 10 years ago. Do you?
No, because I feel like there wasn't as much information out there and it was kind of like kept close and we didn't like to share it as much as everyone now just spews everything everywhere. I feel like.
That is true. Everybody spews everything everywhere. That is true. So I think that's one of the reasons. So you could build your authority and your trust factor. I teach sales mostly, and I like to teach it from like the old school lens and also more of like the online new school lens. So in old school sales, they would call it building rapport. Right. And building that trust and that authority. And that used to be like, oh, let me go take you out for coffee, or let me go do an office visit, or let me like talk to you about your dog. Like that's what it used to be. But now in the online spaces, It's a lot easier to build rapport, through getting media, through content, through and using that to support your sales. So I think if you're able to show that you're trustworthy, building your authority is a good way of doing that. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, and again, you tell me if you've seen this. Part of what I've seen is, and I've had a lot of people and online marketers tell me the same thing. I think the consumers have gotten a lot smarter when it comes to like funnels and things like that. So they're not effective as they used to be. Number one. Number two, algorithms are always changing. I know I've seen you talking about that. So that's a constant battle, right? It's a constant thing, right? And number three, I think people want to know that they're talking to an actual human. Sometimes I think, there's a series of factors that played into this. The consumer has gotten smarter for sure. But I think also like we are all zoomed out after 2020 and we are all funneled out and we are all automations out. We are like, we're over it. We're done because it was just so much in 2020. So part of what's going on is that people want to know that there's an actual human behind the business provider that they're thinking of hiring. And when you build authority, you can let people know like, okay, there's an actual human here, like we're going to take good care of you. Like this is not a bunch of automations where we're just going to like drop you and then we're gone, So I think there's a few reasons why you want to, those are two like current reasons. And then in terms of like reasons you always want to have, it just makes the sale easier.
Yes. No, 100%. And I think too, like you talked about the idea of it being a person behind the actual business. Do you think that there's a platform or a place that works best? I know we're going to talk about media and using it within the content, but how would you show that there's a person there? So I'm kind of struggling with that.
So the way that you see it with media, right? And if you want to get media, we'll talk about this a lot. But the reason this matters for media is because, and I'm sure you get pitched all the time. I get pitched all the time. I'm not really reading pitches that come from PR companies because they're the standard thing that they spewed to everybody. I'm reading the one that came directly from the owner who came to me with a really good idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's one of the reasons, right? And then, for example, like when you get those personal stories in the media, like people immediately feel connected to you. So it's like you have the authority from like Forbes or Entrepreneur or whatever you're trying to get into. And at the same time, it's like, especially if it's interview format or a feature, they're getting that story. So when I was a financial writer, some of the most popular ones were about the financial independence movement. FIRE is what people would call it, financial independence, retire early. And it was personal stories of people who had retired early after 10 years. It wasn't them like being very perfect or anything like that. I think sometimes people try and do this whole perfectionism thing and it doesn't work. So, and those stories, like people eat them up. They're just like regular people who like saved half their income and retired and have a dog and bought a farmstead and have 2 small kids, and people eat up those stories. And then they want to go to their website and buy whatever affiliate product that they're, recommending or whatever program that they have.
Okay. So the reason that I asked that question is I know a lot of my bloggers rely heavily on social media. So anytime I go to talk about media pitches and getting in front of, interviews like that, there's hesitation because they're like, I'm already putting in this effort over on Instagram, and they don't see how that connection can lead to that relationship. So the way that you just described that is perfect, because I will always talk a lot about like Instagram stories. You be the person in there, have those conversations, get to know your people, ask the questions. Whereas that's what being in media can lead to, because you do these sort of interviews where if it's a podcast, you're getting the voice, you're getting that person. Where if it's TV, you see the person. Same thing, even like you said in an article, that if you're on Forbes or wherever else it might be that's relevant to your niche. So I love the correlation that you just made with that.
It's also scale, right? Because there's only so much you can do on social media while that builds over time. Whereas if you get a feature on somebody else's audience, like I'm on podcasts all the time, just like you, getting on somebody else's platform, like that's the same as speaking. Basically, you're on somebody else's platform and it is so easy to monetize that.
Okay. So if we're looking at this and we want to be able to build our authority, how would we do it with content? So we've kind of already stepped into it a little bit.
We stepped into it a little bit. So are you talking about like their own content or what they're going to be pitching the media?
Yeah, I would say what they're going to be pitching to media. Like, what would that kind of look like? How are we going to build authority with that?
Right. So one of the things I tell all my clients this, and when I was a writer, this is always what I was looking for when I was looking for experts. I need angles. Right. Even now, as a podcaster, I interview people on my podcast all the time. I need angles. So don't come to me or anyone you're pitching in the media with like a generic story. Like a lot of people will send pitches and they'll be like, oh, here's my business. Right. Or I remember one time I got a pitch. This was many years ago for like light up cat ear headphones. And I was like, do y'all even listen to my podcast? I have a financial podcast. What does this have to do with my audience at all? Right. I have a whole collection of bad pitches in my inbox. I'm sure you do too. That's what most people tend to do. Or they send like a very generic cut and paste. They sent it to like 100 different places. There was no forethought put into this whatsoever. What we're looking for, those of us who are getting pitched, and I say those of us because I still get pitched for the podcast, we're looking for some sort of unique twist, angle, story, a different way of looking at things, a different perspective. So for example, I recently had David Nagel on the podcast and he talks a lot about wealth consciousness and finance. He has completely different views than what the traditional personal finance industry typically tells you. That is an interesting story.
Right. Because it's totally different than what anyone else is thinking.
Because it's totally different than what anyone else is thinking, right? So rather than thinking about it as an advertisement for you, which is how a lot of people think of media, right? You have to think about it, okay, well, what's a unique angle or a unique story so I can basically help the writer, the podcaster, the interviewer, the TV production, whoever you're pitching. How can I do them a solid by providing them some really, really good content that is valuable for their audience? Most people don't think about media that way. They're thinking about it in terms of like, they're thinking about it like it's an advertisement, really.
Right. Yes. So other than the angle, how do you make your pitch stand out when pitching the media?
Oh, you got to make it short and quick, right? Because they don't have time to be reading Bible long emails. No time whatsoever. So one of the things that I would teach, and I did this when I was a writer and I do it when I teach pitch media. So it works for both. One of the things I would do is I would immediately establish my authority that I've already built in the first sentence, right? So I would be like, oh, hey, my name's Amanda Abella. My work has been featured in X, Y, and Z. Right now, someone's going to be like, oh, but I haven't been featured in anything yet. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. If you've been on a blog, if you've been on someone's podcast, that all counts because then they can go look you up. Right. So don't think that because you haven't been on Forbes, but you've been on a podcast, that the podcast won't help you establish the authority. So that's thing number one that I do, establish authority from the beginning, first sentence. Right. The next thing I do is I go straight into the angles. Right. I'm like, so I remember when I was pitching Inc. magazine, this is what I did, right? I went to their website and I noticed that this was many years ago, and I noticed they had a lot of columns about entrepreneurship and money, but they weren't talking about it from the millennial angle. There were lots of articles talking about millennials, like don't buy avocado toast, right? Or don't buy lattes, or like, they're throwing the housing market for a loop, all that kind of stuff, right? But there was no column by a millennial talking about the trends that millennials were going through in finance. So what I did is I pitched them a column and I'm like, this is what you're missing. I can provide this. Here are 3 ideas. And that's it. That's all you need.
Yes, because it's straight to the point and fills in the gaps for them. So finding what they're missing is even a better way to have that specific angle.
Yeah. Yeah, find what they're missing is a really, really good way of doing it. Or if you have a unique story that works for their audience, that will work as well. In that instance, I found what they were missing. But I've also had instances where, like, I pitched a podcast recently. It was called Freelancer to CEO. And I was like, oh, I've been through this exact process in the last 2 years and built a multiple 6-figure business with employees. I would love to come talk about the story because it seems totally in alignment with your audience. They responded within 5 minutes and they were like, yes, this is exactly the kind of stories we're looking for.
Okay. And so doing your research, making sure basically you understand what they're missing or what they're ideally looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a huge one. And again, so the first point, don't treat it like an advertisement, which is what most business owners do.
Right. Yes. So is there a specific medium or a media that actually helps build your authority quicker, like podcasts or TV or articles or specific websites?
That is a really good question. Honestly, I've done all of it. I've done radio, I've done TV, I've done podcasts, I've done videos, I've done it all. I think it probably depends on the business owner and their audience, but I will tell you for me specifically, podcasting has been huge. I don't know what your experience has been. I think it might depend on the business.
Yes. No, I mean, podcasting, that's obviously something that I love. And I enjoy doing it myself and kind of said, you know what, I'm going to start this medium myself. But yes, because I think there's just so many ways for people to then hear that. And the content can get repurposed a lot of times. Yep. So that we're not just hearing it on a podcasting app. We're also finding it in Google because the person did SEO and has a blog post that actually goes along with the podcast episode. And then we're repurposing it for Instagram or TikTok or wherever else they're all going to be using the information. So yes, I would definitely agree with that. And I think then it just becomes like finding those niche specific podcasts that would work for your audience or the people that you could potentially bring from that audience that would then be into your content.
Yeah. And, for me, now that we're talking about podcasts, like for me, I mean, I'm pitching my own products and services on my own podcast. I've done sponsorship stuff and all that. But I found with the shifts that I made, I was actually much more efficient and successful revenue-wise selling my own stuff. And then when I go on other people's podcasts, it's the same. You kind of have that freedom, or I guess maybe even the format just allows you to go deeper into understanding somebody. Whereas if you have like a 2-minute TV segment, like those producers are like, they're on point. They're like on a really tight schedule. I remember one time I did 24 radio and TV interviews in a 4-hour period for one of my influencer clients. Oh yeah, it was wild. Those TV producers, you got 2 minutes and that's it. And then you got 30 seconds and you're going to the next one, right? So yeah, you're getting in front of a lot of people and it's massive, right? But I feel like podcasting provides like this special place where you can really get to know someone.
Yes. No, I definitely agree. So something that I found interesting that you said before was about the idea of being able to use media in order to increase revenue. So you talk about this idea of making sure that you're making money from it and how to get that actual feature or get that article that you're writing for or on that podcast to then turn it into making money. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the reason that came about was because when I was a blogger, I was getting a lot of media and I had no way to make money off of it. I don't know if that happened to you too. It did.
Yes. And I know that it still continues to happen to my listeners. So I definitely want to hear what you say.
Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with number one, what is the product, right? So every time I do something for us, it's our Persuade to Profit 90-day sales training. Like that is the main thing. That is the main program that we're funneling people into, that we're selling. That's our bread and butter right there. So every interview I do, like something has to lead back to that. That being said, it doesn't necessarily come up in an interview, particularly a written one, right? Or maybe on a TV segment. But if someone goes to my website, the whole back end is set up for sales. So the minute you hit an email list, oh, guess what? We've got an inbound campaign for sales. We've got upsell emails. We've got consultation call emails. So it's really a back end thing that people need to kind of figure out for that, rather than it being so like, oh, let me do this TV segment and talk about my product. It's more like the TV segment brings all the eyeballs and then the infrastructure handles all the sales.
Yes. So when you're talking about this, you're talking about having an opt-in or a lead magnet, or in other words, basic blogger terms, something to give to them in exchange for their email list.
Yes.
And then from there, it would go into a sales sequence that is sort of like a welcome sequence, but there's a sale to make money because that's the purpose of a business. Not saying this obviously for you. I'm saying it that are rolling their eyes at me going, gosh, she always talks about this.
Yes, we always talk about money. I wish somebody would have talked to me about it from the beginning. That's why we go so hard on this stuff. Those of you who are listening and resisting, like,
yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. Because that is, I think that there was, I was fortunate that it was only 6 months that I kind of just sat there doing it as a hobby and not understanding you could make money. Ended up at a conference and then sat at a table with a bunch of 6-figure bloggers and had no idea back in 2010 that was even possible.
Right.
And now I feel like we push it, and that's all we want to talk about because we don't want to waste anybody else's time the way that we have.
Exactly. I tell my clients all the time, I made all the mistakes so you don't have to. So let's just get it done right from the beginning. Otherwise, there's a lot of problems you'll have to fix down the road and it's way more work.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. So I love the fact that you talked about not only that opt-in, that not necessarily you're talking about your product or even your opt-in during those interviews or that article, but you lead them back to your website. So your website is set up in order to capture those people. So they see the opt-in when they first come there, which is why we talk about having a squeeze page homepage, which a lot of bloggers go, nobody comes to my homepage. They just come in from Pinterest to a specific post because they found a recipe or they found a DIY. Can you talk a little bit about how your website is set up to be that squeeze page?
Yeah. So we actually, we have a whole class on this. We could talk about it. We'll talk about it later. But one of the things that I would say, right, is obviously make sure it's above the fold, right? So it's in that first third of the website. Make sure it's something your audience actually wants. When we put our clients through Persuade to Profit, this is a part of what we help them create. Actually, I would say, let's start with the end in mind. Let me backtrack for a second. There's a better way of doing this, right? What is the main product that you are selling? Let's start there. And what is the main problem that it solves, right? This is what's typically referred to as the higher ticket offer. So that's the one that you could sell. I don't know, maybe it's like a $2,000 video course, for example. So start with the end in mind. That's the first thing you need to figure out. It's like you have to work backwards in order to make this really effective. Once you have that figured out, then what I tell our clients to do is create 3 different opt-ins, right? That would solve one tiny little problem, right? That you cover in the bigger sale offer, right? So for example, for many years, we had one that was about how to do market research. Like, here's a worksheet that will help you figure out what your niche is, right? It's just a worksheet, and they would opt into that. And it was one of the most popular ones. And then they would get funneled into our big program where we have like 2 freaking modules just on market research and how to turn that into products and content, right? So start with the end in mind. I think a mistake a lot of us make, I did it, I made the mistake, right? Is we kind of just like create all this stuff like from our own heads, right? And we never think about the business strategy behind it. I did it for years when I was a blogger, and then I had to turn into a business owner. And I was like, oh, wait a second, we got to do something different. So that's what I would say. So I tell our clients, create 3, test them, and then double and triple down on the one that gets you the most opt-ins.
Okay. Yes. And that's where you're going to be linking to it within content, not only on the homepage, but then also probably your spot on your Instagram profile, any sort of social media platforms. That's what it's going to go to.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something? This is totally sidebarring a little bit from our conversation, but I have to ask you about Instagram now, because does your link go to the actual opt-in, or does it go to your homepage?
Oh, well, we have a link right now. We're testing different things on Instagram. First of all, I basically live in my Instagram DMs and get so many consultations from Instagram DMs. It's crazy, right? Mm-hmm. So that's number one. We're testing this thing. We actually just started using it called like Search My Social. I haven't actually gone to look at the analytics on that yet because we just did it. And one of the things that we do is we have like different links. So we're like, we have an assessment, right? Or here's the podcast, or here's where to book a strategy call. So it's basically a bunch of opt-ins, right? And then depending on what we say in the post, we're like, okay, here's link in bio. I will say a strategy I've been using, which has helped a lot with sales, which has nothing to do with the link in bio, right? But if you go to my Instagram, you'll see DM me the word script, right? For our fail-proof sales script. So rather than having to go off of Instagram, which is I think I heard you mention this on a podcast, Instagram ain't that great for traffic. It's just not, right? But I found that in doing that, instead of just like, and putting that on my bio, like I'm constantly in the DMs.
Yes. Yeah, no, I love that. I actually, for my podcast episodes, I actually tell them, you're going to hear me say it when we go to talk about yours, is I tell them to go to my DM and just tell me you want this training, and I will send it a link right over to you. And that way it's clickable. Because it is, it's just so much easier to know exactly what they want right in the DM to continue that conversation. So we've been leading towards this training that we're talking about. Tell us a little bit about the Media Pitch 365 calendar and training. Is that the right one?
Yep, that's the right one. So that is the one that's specifically for building your authority. So basically my team and I got together last year. People had been begging us for a training like this, because part of what I teach, because I was a writer for so many years, is like, okay, well, here's how you get media from the perspective of a writer, and also from the perspective of a business owner that has gotten myself a lot of media without having to pay a PR company. So what I was like, okay, well, what can we create for people that would make it really, really easy for them? Because I understand that I was a writer and I could come up with pitches all day long, right? And like, I live, sleep, and breathe content, and I did it for 8 years. But not everybody can do that. And not everybody has the time to do that. The other thing I realized that I understood was I knew exactly when to pitch things. So this is really important. A lot of people don't get this. If you want something for the new year in January, you better be pitching that story in November, because they have really tight deadlines. So essentially what we did is we created about 5 different calendars in different niches. We've got finance, we have health, we have, what else do we have? Relationships, spirituality, there's a business, finance. We have a lot of different niches, and there's a calendar for each niche. And what we've done is we have 365 media pitch ideas for each niche. And then we tell you when to pitch it. So for example, in November, you'll find a lot of New Year's ideas, right? Why? Because if you want that to run in January, you need to pitch it in November, right? The other thing that we've done is we looked up what holidays or special days might be occurring that the media might be wanting stories for that. So we put that on the calendars for you as well. Basically, we took the guesswork out of it for you. So it only needs to take you a couple, like 10 minutes a day. Maybe just like pull up the idea and go with it. And then the other thing that it includes is the exact email templates I've used to get on podcasts like Entrepreneur on Fire, to get a column at Inc. You'll have that exact email template. And we have some cool bonuses that'll help people get organized and also figure out who they need to pitch.
I love it. So what we're going to do is we're going to link to that in the show notes. Everybody listening obviously knows, I'm going to say it. You can DM me at Jenny_Melrose to get the training. Just tell me pitch training and I'll know exactly what you're talking about, or tell me Amanda Abella and I will make sure that we send it over to you so that you all have it. Amanda, where are the best places to connect with you? I know you're going to tell me Instagram, which I love. So go ahead.
Yes, Instagram. We love Instagram. We live in the DMs on Instagram, and also our Facebook group. So for anybody who's looking to learn sales or online marketing or building authority, we have a Facebook group called High Ticket Sales for women coaches and course creators. Just go to Facebook, search High Ticket Sales. And for women coaches, it'll pop right up. I usually get the question, do I have to be a coach? No, we have tons of bloggers and freelancers in there, but for SEO purposes, we needed to make it pretty clear.
Yes.
And we do complimentary trainings on pricing, creating offers, sales, negotiation. We have a couple on getting PR that are really, really popular, and it's a great group.
Excellent. All right. Perfect. Amanda, we're going to link to those in the show notes. I appreciate you so much for taking the time to speak with me and my audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. And I forgot to mention one thing that I think is really important. Is it all right if I mention it? All right. People think that getting PR is really hard, or they have a lot of imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. So what I don't want to happen is y'all get the Media Pitch 365 system, and then you're like, oh no, I can't do it because your imposter syndrome is kicking in. And I just want people to know, like, you are worthy of getting this kind of attention for yourself. You have really great content that helps a lot of people, right? And more people need to know about it. And you don't need to be Instagram famous in order to get media.
So good and so true. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I warned you ahead of time that we were going to be stressing the fact that you needed to have an email list. Clearly, it is a great idea to build your authority by pitching for media. But in order for it to actually result in revenue, you need to make sure that you are growing your list, getting the people that are coming from that media onto your list to then be able to offer product, service, or content to continue to get page views with traffic and ad income. So if you haven't already grabbed that email list guide that I talked about, I want to make sure that you do so. Send me a DM on Instagram at Jenny_Melrose and tell me email growth guide, and I will make sure to send it directly to you. As always, you guys, I appreciate you all so much when you leave a rating or a review on your favorite podcasting app. It helps for me to find and have on the show great guests like Amanda. So if you haven't already left a rating and review, I would so appreciate it if you would do so. All right, guys, until next time, I will see you all then.